Some of the more interesting economic news lately has been the impending demise of the restaurant chain Red Lobster. Personally, I kind of like the place, despite the fact that, I don't really like seafood. But recently, it was reported that the company had lost over $11 million, presumably from the all you can eat shrimp fest. Now, while it did lose that money, that's really not the reason they're filing for bankruptcy. It was claimed publicly that that was the cause, but it really wasn't. Others point to the long term economic effects of COVID, specifically that its customer intake had declined 30% during that time since 2019. Some have pointed to the increasing inflation that has drastically increased the cost of dining out. McDonald's alone has seen a 100% increase in the cost of its items, though you could rightfully claim that inflation didn't increase the cost of the Big Mac to $18. Bourgeois greed did. Inflation is a very real thing that affects the working class and the lumpen proletarian people's lives. As of this month, May 2024, there is a 33.1 billion shortage in funding for food bank services across the US. And this trend began in 2022 largely due to the effects of COVID. And this lack of funding is the worst that it has been in 20 years. The cause of it has been the effects of inflation, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the U.S. Census Bureau, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Now, despite all of this, it's not the cause for Red Lobster's ultimate demise. Rather, it has been a deliberate effort. It was dismantled and destroyed by the investment firm that used to own it. Now, that may not appear to make sense, but I assure you that it does. Red Lobster filed for bankruptcy because private equity firms fleeced it for all they could, and now they're discarding it. A company called Golden Gate Capital purchased Red Lobster from Darden Restaurants in 2014. Darden had been a major investor in several restaurants, including Olive Garden and Longhorn Steakhouse. Typically, when a private equity firm takes over a company, it finances the acquisition by loading the company down with debt, which makes the deal cheaper for the private equity firm. But it also makes it harder for the company to thrive. In Red Lobster's case, though, the problem went beyond that. While Golden Gate Capital did add debt to Red Lobster's balance sheet, it also made another move, selling off Red Lobster's real estate assets for $1.5 billion, forcing Red Lobster to lease those locations back. So basically, they purchased the restaurant in 2014 for $2.1 billion in cash. Since they've run the restaurant chain for a profit with the usual margins one would expect from a chain that large. Afterwards, they loaded the company up with debt, which is common with these types of sabotage purchases. I use quotation marks because that's a firm I came up with. That money borrowed went to Golden Gate Capital. That debt covered most of what Golden Gate Capital had paid for Red Lobster. Then it sold off $1.5 billion in property that Red Lobster owned. The purchase is suspected to be owned or controlled to some degree by the people at Golden Gate Capital, so they sold it to themselves, allegedly. The new owners of the land charged a rent to continue having the restaurants on it. That rent was well over the market rate, leaching money out of the company into the pockets of the conglomerate landlord. Now, the leases signed with Red Lobster were simply insane from a renter's perspective. They were what's called triple net leases, where they pay the lease, operating expenses, property taxes, and insurance at the locations. The fact that you don't own the property but pay the taxes on it is total nonsense to me. But the purpose of the deal was to minimize what the landlord had to pay and maximize what they could get out of the lease. But this hurt the company while it was already struggling to survive. To give you some perspective, according to the Chapter 11 filing, Red Lobster spent $200 million leasing locations, a full third of which it spent on locations for what it calls underperforming stores. As if that wasn't enough money, Golden Gate Capital then proceeded to sell 25% of the company to a seafood company called Thai Union. Now, they're familiar with Red Lobster because they are the largest suppliers to the company, basically seafood products. Then, 4 years later, Golden Gate Capital sold off the rest of its stake to Thai Union and other investors. A notable problem here, aside from the debt and insane lease deals, was that Thai Union had no experience with restaurants, causing them to go through 4 different CEOs in 3 years. Here's an example. Thai Union's acquisition of Red Lobster also created an odd set of incentives. Thai Union, as one of Red Lobster's biggest suppliers of shrimp, had a clear incentive to increase the amount of shrimp Red Lobster bought from it, as well as the prices it paid for that shrimp. Red Lobster CEOs had an incentive to keep the owners happy. So perhaps it was no coincidence that in 2023, Red Lobster's former CEO, Paul Kenny, made the ultimate endless shrimp deal, which had previously only been a short-lived promotion, a permanent part of the menu, even though, according to the bankruptcy filing, there was significant pushback against the idea from other members of the management team. The current CEO, Jonathan Tibbus, said that Thai Union exercised outsized influence on the company's shrimp purchasing. Although this was clearly evident to me by the fact that the two other suppliers of breaded shrimp were then terminated and Thai Union became the only supplier of shrimp. Thai Union, of course, denies these allegations. The result of this mismanagement forced the company to write down $535 million of its investment, meaning they basically had to go into their books and admit that the value of their asset had dropped by $500 million. Now they're filing for bankruptcy. So what's the lesson learned here? The system doesn't care to provide jobs or a stable future for employees, or even a sustainable business model to generate profits. It only cares for maximizing the amount of money it can get out of something, even if it means destroying it. If it's more profitable to destroy something than to preserve it, then the logic of the market is spoken. Afterwards, a scenario based on a system of competing interests tore apart what was left of it. When the different parties with the different interests coalesced into one project, they each pulled their own way and destroyed the very thing that they were trying to make work. Capitalism, if anything, is a system of competing interests. That is what is supposed to produce what's best for everyone. Am I right?
Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.